Hello, I'm Ramjee Chandran. Welcome to episode 23 and the concluding part 10 of my mini-series on the Chalukyan Empire. We are in 733 AD. The Emperor Vijayaditya had died. His son Vikramaditya was taking the throne. Vijayaditya, being older, more experienced and more battle-hardened, had developed something of a distaste for war and instead created a time of cultural renaissance in the Chalukyan kingdom. But the young Vikramaditya was impatient and impetuous, and he believed that his own energy was best spent on the battlefield. His one ambition: sack the Pallava capital Kanchipuram. And this is something that none of the previous Chalukya campaigns had satisfactorily achieved. Vikramaditya had tasted victory once before against the Pallavas when he had campaigned as crown prince for his father. In that campaign, the Pallava king Parameshwaravarman II had lost his life, and following the death of Parameshwara, the Pallava dynasty had started to develop deep cracks. So this was an opportune time for Vikramaditya to attack the Pallavas again, this time as king. Understandably, if there ever was a time to exploit the situation, it would be now. But the trouble is, it appeared that all of Vikramaditya's reign seemed to be spent plotting campaigns against the Pallavas. While this was going on, the Umayyad Caliphate had attacked the Chalukyan kingdom in the north, by all accounts, with the plan to move into the wealthy Deccan. Vikramaditya did not attend to this threat personally, and he left the defense of the northern territories to his cousin Anani Janashraya Pulakeshi, who ruled the Gujarat branch of the Chalukyas. Assisting Pulakeshi was a young king of a feudatory, the Rashtrakutas, and his name was Danti Durga. Danti Durga joined the battle with Anani Janashraya and helped drive the Umayyad back across the Indus, and this attracted praise from his overlord Vikramaditya. But throughout history, people like Danti Durga are driven by achievement. A pat on the back is very nice, but it only fuels their ambition. And immediately after, Danti Durga became the nemesis of the Vatapi Chalukyas. In this episode, I will take you from the time Vikramaditya became king to the end of the Vatapi Chalukyas, a short 20 years. But before I go swimming in those waters, allow me to thank my sponsors, the Prestige Group, whose corporate support helps me create this podcast. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. Alright, we're in the year 733 CE, stands for Common Era, but we are reaching the end of a rather uncommon era. So let's take a look at the last run of the great Vatapi Chalukyas. Also, we have come full cycle to where I left you at part 5 of my series on the Ganga dynasty. I would urge you to go back and listen to that episode where I described the events of this period, but from the perspective of the Ganga dynasty. Even if you don't, I'll try to weave in as many facts as I can into this episode. And for those of you who follow my episodes closely, and I know there are many, I thank you for following me and listening, and maybe you will treat this repeat as a nice refresher. So moving on, the fall of Parameshwaravarman had been bad for the Pallavas. It accelerated the rot within the Pallava dynasty and encouraged their rivals to start attacking them. Notably, that included their neighbors and rivals the Pandyas, and of course, the Chalukyas and the Gangas. Parameshwara had been succeeded by a 12-year-old boy, Nandipothavarman, who would have been vulnerable, and therefore this would have been the best time for Vikramaditya to launch another attack on the Pallavas. So in 734 AD, once again, he marched across the Deccan. This was not too long after he became king, where it is described that he made hasty plans to attack Kanchi. This time, he was accompanied by Sri Purusha Ganga's son, Ereyappa. When the armies reached Kanchi, the weakened Pallavas, who appear to be more concerned with the safety of the underaged king, offered minimal resistance, if any resistance at all, and moved the young boy somewhere safe. The road to Kanchipuram lay open. And for the first time in the long history of the Pallava-Chalukya feud, the Chalukyas were going to march right into the capital, Kanchipuram. For a long time, Vikramaditya had suffered the stories of how the Pallavas had sacked their beloved capital Vatapi and had killed his ancestor, the illustrious Immadi Pulakesi. The sense of revenge that burned inside the young, impressionable mind became an obsession. So, vengeance in his heart, he marched into the city, into a realm of scared citizens who braced themselves for the dreaded inevitability of the sack that was sure to follow. But while Vikramaditya went round Kanchi, he had made a visit to the Kailasanatha temple, and it is said that he was struck by the beauty of the architecture, and something came over him. A new emotion appeared to have taken over. An inscription in Kannada, visible even today on a pillar on the east wall of the Mandapam of the Rajasimheshwara shrine, talks about how Vikramaditya returned all the riches that belonged to the temple, and he also became incredibly generous, not only by not looting the kingdom, but also giving from his own wealth. The Kuram plates speak of several grants that Vikramaditya made to the Brahmins of the area as well as to others. The grants speak of heaps of gold being given to temples, and I quote, "He made the twice born, the distressed, and the helpless rejoice by continuous gifts." Much is made about Vikramaditya's cultural generosity in not sacking Kanchi, and this appears on several inscriptions, an unusual number of them. Clearly and justifiably, this campaign to Kanchi was something considered important enough to note repeatedly. Another much quoted and much celebrated result of this military campaign is a cultural exchange which is visible even to this day in the form of the Virupaksha temple in Pattadakal near Badami. Vikramaditya had married two sisters, Lokamahadevi and Trilokamahadevi, and Lokamahadevi is credited with building the Virupaksha temple. It was first called the Lokeshwara temple after herself, and then renamed the Virupaksha temple. The Virupaksha temple was an achievement. It is clearly seen as remarkable, and it is said to be the grandest of all structures in Pattadakal. Even the architect's name is mentioned in an inscription on the east porch of the gateway. Significantly, the inscriptions of the temple identified the guild of builders too who contributed to its creation, some of whom are said to have been brought in from the Kailasanatha temple at Kanchi. Notable is the mention of the Sutradhar, literally holder of the thread, or master measurer, or simply chief architect. His name was Gunda Anivaritacharya, and he was given the title Tribhuvanacharya, meaning master of the three worlds. There are many interesting books on the temple detailing every aspect of its unique Dravidian style of architecture and its inspiration from the Kailasanatha temple. The younger sister Trilokamahadevi, who was the mother of the next king Kirtivarman, also built a temple in Pattadakal, first named after herself, the Trilokeshwara temple, and today known as the Mallikarjuna temple. And this temple too, it is said, was built to commemorate the three victories that their husband Vikramaditya had over the Pallavas. Now we have gone over two of the campaigns. The third campaign was by Vikramaditya's son Kirtivarman II as crown prince at his own insistence, and this must have been around 741 AD, with not much time even after the second campaign. It goes to how obsessed the Chalukyas were with the Pallavas. Now the inscription that commemorates Vikramaditya's three victories over the Pallavas is to be noted that it's not an official royal inscription but a private contribution. And there is also the matter that the third campaign may not even have been a full battle but just a raid. It's worth pointing out that historians still even question whether the temples were actually built by the queens to celebrate their husbands' victories. Historian Ramesh, in particular, challenges several of the commonly accepted ideas about the history of these inscriptions. All that said, Pattadakal is today a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the area around Badami is spectacular for its amazing history. There was another significant event that occurred during the reign of Vikramaditya II, and this was the attack on the kingdom by the Umayyad Caliphate. The Umayyad Caliphate which had succeeded the Rashidun Caliphate, not only followed in their footsteps, but expanded the empire across the world with a footprint from Spain to China, and yet they suffered a defeat and a rout at the hands of the Chalukyas. Much more on all that as soon as I return, right after this commercial break.
Just how the North Star is the guiding light, the star of North Bangalore, Prestige Camden Gardens is a guiding light where your search for the perfect home ends. Prestige Camden Gardens, the star of North Bangalore. Step up to luxury with 3 and 4 BHK apartments on Tanisandra Main Road, 10 minutes from Manyata Tech Park, 25 minutes from the airport, and well connected with other parts of the city. Prestige Camden Gardens. Prices starting from 2.25 crore onwards. To know more, visit prestigeconstructions.com. RERA approved.
Hello, I'm back. Now again, those of you who followed this podcast would recognize that I'm now cycling back to the point where I left off with my series on the Gangas, and this time in part 6, where I described the Umayyad attack in great detail. I urge you to consider listening to that episode. Now back to where we were. In short, while Vikramaditya and his son Kirtivarman were preoccupied with attacking the Pallavas repeatedly, the Tajika forces, as the Umayyad forces were called, had made their way across the Indus in an effort to conquer territory in India, particularly with a plan to march down to the Deccan and capture its wealth. But a coalition of forces led by Vikramaditya's cousin Anani Janashraya Pulakeshi drove the Umayyads back across the Indus, and they were not seen again for a very long time, some say 300 years. Now the coalition had included Pratihara Nagabhatta I of Malwa, the Rajasthan king Bappa Rawal of Mewar, and notably Danti Durga, the young and ambitious star from the Rashtrakuta dynasty. They met at the Battle of Navasari, probably 739 AD, and it was significant because it thwarted the Umayyad from getting anywhere close to the rich Deccan heartland. Now, although a grateful Vikramaditya bestowed titles upon his cousin and also reserved special praise for Danti Durga, there has been some question about his attitude. An essay published by the Mythic Society in Bangalore suggests that Vikramaditya had become greatly disinterested in the kingdom. There are no mentions of the Arab attack on Chalukya inscriptions, and the essay suggests that Vikramaditya would have been very aware of the dangers of the caliphate, so it's not as though he thought the attack trivial. But maybe he did. Considering such a campaign by the Umayyad would have been a fool's errand, considering the scale of the logistics and forces that would have required for them to have campaigned so far south in the Deccan, it is understandable that he might have just asked his cousin to handle the matter. And if the Umayyads could not even defeat a coalition of the feudatories up north, it is logical to assume that they would have had a worse fate at the hands of the Karnata Bala or the huge Chalukyan army, not to mention the rest of the allied forces such as the Gangas. But all that is moot, and the caliphate was driven away for 300 years. But we cannot ignore the suggestion of apathy outright, as the clamour and general volume around Vikramaditya had become strangely muted. And then there is some mystery about what happened to Vikramaditya. We know that Kirtivarman succeeded him around the year 744 AD, and therefore Vikramaditya was not really an old man when he died. His death has deeply interested historians. Maybe the answer to the mystery lies in a strange set of shrines. About 5 kilometers west of Pattadakal, at a place called B.N. Jalihala, there is a valley locally called Hulgemanakulla. It is surrounded by red sandstone hills and a nice small waterfall. Each of the sandstone shrines is built at different heights. The largest one at the base of the valley has a sanctum and half a hall or an ardha mandapa, but it doesn't have any tower. Inside, an inscription in Kannada reads, "This inscription is dedicated to the illustrious Vikramaditya Satyashraya. Benama, the son of Devari, made this casket. May this act be regarded as a meritorious deed." What this suggests is that Vikramaditya's cremated remains were placed in a casket and buried at this very site. The cluster of 11 shrines resembles a mass cemetery, probably built simultaneously. Behind Vikramaditya's shrine was found a hero stone with 3 panels that show 3 bullocks, 2 in motion, 1 lying down, symbolizing death. And the bullocks are not yoked, and this is symbolic of a heavenward journey. The middle panel depicts a hero and 2 women being led to heaven, and the top panel shows them in the afterlife. Memorial stones like this often honored those who died while traveling, possibly in an ambush. So did Vikramaditya and his 2 queens and 8 others meet their end in an ambush? If so, the smaller shrines beside Vikramaditya's could belong to his beloved queens, Lokamahadevi and Triloka Mahadevi. Several historians, such as Meena Mohite, disagree with the ambush theory and point out that, among other things, it is unlikely that Kirtivarman would have allowed such an inglorious monument to have been built for his parents and stepmother without due pomp and circumstance. Or is there a deeper story lurking here? We don't know more, and unless some new evidence shows up, this mystery is buried with Vikramaditya. Kirtivarman II was the last ruler of the Vatapi Chalukyas. He was the son of Triloka Mahadevi, the younger of the 2 sisters his father had married. When he took the throne, things were already pretty much dull. It is simpler to think of a cataclysmic event such as a war or a coup to mark the end of one era and the start of another. That's great in the movie version, but in real life, sometimes things are on a downslide and then in an uncontrollable downward spiral. Now, historian Nagaraju's notion that Vikramaditya had become apathetic towards the end of his reign and then the steady downfall of the Chalukyas might suggest that the end of the dynasty had started much earlier than commonly accepted. What we do know is that the catalyst for the fall of the Chalukyas was Danti Durga, the Rashtrakuta. Soon after the Battle of Navasari, Danti Durga, despite all the praise heaped on him by Vikramaditya, or maybe encouraged by it, set about expanding his empire. The epigraphical records are brief, but knitting together pieces of information, the picture of a systematic and purposeful campaign emerges. Already in 742 AD, Danti Durga had occupied Ellora, a territory of the Chalukyas, and this means that things had started to happen even during the reign of Vikramaditya. If there was no immediate military response to what would have been an outrage for the mighty Chalukyas, it could only mean that the core strength of the Chalukyas had already been weakened and the rot had set in. Vikramaditya's apathy and later his son Kirtivarman's ineffectuality, despite the young man's desperate belligerence, could have resulted from that strange period of denial when the inevitable is becoming clear. Everything was going wrong. The nucleus of Chalukya power crippled. The sense of fate must have been a black cloud over the empire. The great Karnata Bala feeling demoralized and worried for their future. In the north, Danti Durga was eating away at the provinces. He had already started to convince a number of the other feudatories to side with him against the Chalukyas. Everything else and everyone else, barring the eternal loyalists, the Gangas, was going awry in the Mysore-Deccan region, with the Pandyas and the Pallavas making inroads towards the west. By the time Kirtivarman had taken over, Danti Durga's methodical campaigns were yielding him results. The goal was becoming very clear: to take Vatapi and destroy the Chalukyas. By 742 AD, as I said, he had taken control of Ellora, but his prize conquests took place along the rivers Mahi, Narmada and Mahanadi. He had subdued the Gurjaras of Malwa, the rulers of Kosala and Kalinga, and even the Telugus near Srisailam. These had all been the pride and joy of Chalukya possessions. Now even the Gujarat Chalukyas, who had successfully defended the land against the Umayyad, had all but disappeared. And then Danti Durga made shrewd diplomatic moves. He went to Kanchi and forged an alliance with Nandivarman Pallava Malla by offering his daughter Reva in marriage to the Pallava king. On the other side, the Pandyan king Manavarman Rajasimha, who had formed an alliance with Vikramaditya II, launched an attack on the Pallava territory. but in the process he crossed over into Ganga territory in the Konganadu. Kirtivarman, naturally, came to the assistance of his ally Sri Purusha, and they went to battle. The Chalukya Ganga forces lost heavily to the Pandyas in the Battle of Venbai, and they were forced to make the peace. But the price of peace was that Kirtivarman had to surrender a large part of the Chalukyan southern provinces to the Pandya king. The end of the Chalukyas came in a somewhat desultory manner. One interpretation of available inscriptions by historian Ramesh suggests that toward the end, Kirtivarman II had lost his mind. He quotes an inscription that could translate to, "At the time when Kirtivarman II had lost his senses or control during a period of turbulence or confusion." Of course, this could have been a poetic exaggeration of a bad mood or a sense of despondency. But with all of Kirtivarman's provinces, north and south, slipping away, Danti Durga picked that as the right time and launched a decisive attack around 752 or 753 AD. He is said to have defeated the Chalukyan army decisively and with that declared himself the new emperor of the Deccan. Danti Durga did not have to move into Vatapi. Instead, he asserted his authority from his own capital in Manyaketa. Now, there is some evidence that Kirtivarman continued to issue some grants in the years following his defeat. So while Danti Durga asserted his dominance, the Chalukyas had probably been reduced to a role even beneath that of a feudatory, and Kirtivarman continued to hold the remnants of the Chalukyas together right until 757 AD. Briefly, in 756, when Danti Durga died, he may have been hopeful of getting it all back together, but even these plans were destroyed by Danti Durga's successor, Krishna I, who fought Kirtivarman and killed him. In later years, the blame for everything, maybe unfairly, fell on Kirtivarman. Centuries later, an inscription by the Kalyani Chalukyas laid the destruction of the Vatapi Chalukyas at Kirtivarman's feet with these words. Referring to Kirtivarman II, it translates to, "On account of whose failures the Chalukyas' glory was lost." And thus, the great Chalukya dynasty came to an end. And that, as they say, was that. This concludes my 10-part series on the Chalukyas. From the next episode, we move closer into the territory we know today as Bengaluru, with the Ganga's troubles with the Rashtrakutas and how they sorted everything out. And how did the Pallavas become bedfellows? All that and more in the episodes coming up. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.